Hello, hi everybody, and welcome to this webinar with our title tonight, or this morning if somebody is wherever. How restorative embodied self-awareness is a key for healing and well-being. And we have our special guest and expert, Dr. Alan Fogel here. And I'm your webinar host, Riitta Saarikko, and I'm sitting here in Finland in the coastline, southern coastline. My motivation to arrange this webinar is that I have had an interest in embodiment for about 25 years now. And I really value Alan's work, very deep work on this field. Personally, I work with clients and I use in my work Rosen Method Bodywork, Essential Motion, Movement, and Pesso Boyden system Psychomotor. And my work is very practical. It's both therapeutic and helping people to be more connected to their feeling bodies and somehow to get more in touch with their human potential and somehow being what they really are and the potential every one of us have. And I really think that Alan Fogel can give understanding and why and how the human body-mind works. I think he can give easy to grasp motivations why it's important to enhance embodied self-awareness. And also thinking that the interest in this field has grown enormously during these years I have been working in this field. Alan's scientific view and work also gives a solid basis to therapists and bodyworkers like me. Why this work is important and not just something that some people might believe in. So that it is something that to be valued and it builds key elements to well-being and ability to express our true human potential. And I got to know Alan, it's quite some years ago already. It was about 10 years ago, me and my colleague Riitta Hämäläinen, we were arranging 2 workshops and seminars here in Finland, and Alan and his wife Jacqueline were here, our guests and our keynote speakers, and also leading the workshops. So then we had the title, Why to Feel and Sense and Not Just Think. And I think Alan has really evolved his work after that, and that's the theme tonight. And some words still about Alan. Who is Alan Fogel? When I read his book, in this book, the presentation says that he is a professor of psychology emeritus at the University of Utah, Salt Lake City. He has been an active contributor to research on emotional development in human relationships from infancy through adulthood. He has written several books and scientific articles. He is also a licensed massage therapist, a Rosen Method Bodywork Practitioner, and senior teacher. So, welcome, Alan. Nice to see you here tonight.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it. And thank all of you for attending today. And I hope we were able to give you some information that's useful. And yeah, I'll let you, Riitta, I'll let you kind of lead us off and get us started.
Yeah, before we go any further, maybe we need to say some words how we are going to function in practical terms this evening. So first I'm going to have some questions to you, Alan. And then I have my friend and colleague Scott McLeod here somewhere. He's going to facilitate if any of you who are attending this webinar have questions. So please, Scott, can you say some words and introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Scott McLeod. I live in southern Germany, but I'm American and lived for many years in Salt Lake City, where Alan Fogel lives. Really lived in Salt Lake. And Riitta's asked me to help facilitate the chat and the question and answer period at the end. I myself do a lot of work with journaling, but I find sometimes I don't get to the level, the body level, that for really deep change and for really deep restoration. So I'm looking further. The techniques of journaling are very helpful and very good. And I would like to learn more about how to get to the restorative mode of awareness and consciousness, which seems to lie below the thinking and reacting and managing of your everyday life. So Riitta's offered this opportunity for me to attempt to. What I would ask for you for the question and answer period, if when thoughts do come up and questions come up, please put something in the chat for us to review, to sort of save the moment until it's time. And then at that point, I'll ask you to read or to ask your question with your camera on so that Alan can see you and respond to you rather than having me read it aloud. So when the time comes, I'll call out your name and ask you to turn on your camera and ask your question. All right.
And Scott, just to follow up on that, we may not have time for everyone's question. So just be mindful that even though you may have a great question, we may not get to you just because of the time limit, but we'll do our best to call on as many of you as we can in the time that we have to do that.
Thank you, Alan.
Okay, so let's get started. First, I like to show this book, what I'm so fascinated about. I'm the big fan of this book. I have read it probably 3 times now, and I still feel that there is so much to digest. So in this book, the things we are discussing this evening, they are more depth here if you like to go further on after this webinar. So can you first, I think my first question is, can you, Alan, open a little bit, what do you really mean with this term embodied self-awareness? At least in Finnish language, kehotietoisuus, it can be understood a little bit different ways.
Yeah. Well, it's actually a little bit difficult question for me, even though I invented the term in my earlier book called Body Sense. And it's a challenge for me to answer it right now because my views about what embodied self-awareness might be have changed in the past 12 years since I wrote that first book. So when I wrote that first book called Body Sense, my experience and also the available research on the brain and the body seemed to suggest that there were really 2 kinds of self-awareness. And we want just to say self-awareness is about what we can know or feel about ourselves. Okay, it's not about our sensing of the external environment. Okay, those are things called exteroception, like sight and sound and smell and touch. And what I'm talking about is more interoception, our ability to sense the internal condition of our bodies. So at the time, I thought there were 2 ways to do that. One is by feeling ourselves, like we can feel our heart beating, or we can feel our breathing, or we can feel cold, or we can feel warm, or we can feel happy or sad. So those are all felt experiences. And then the other way we can sense ourselves is by thinking about ourselves. So I can think, well, my name is Alan Fogel. I did this work. I wrote this book. I can describe myself. I can say in words what I think I'm feeling. So I have thoughts about my feelings, but those thoughts about my feelings are not necessarily the same as my feeling itself. So I might say, you know, I'm feeling a little bit sad right now. I'm not feeling sad right now, but I'm just using that as an example. I'm actually feeling kind of upbeat and excited about being here. But talking about myself that way is not the same as actually feeling my excitement or my happiness. To do that, I kind of have to be quiet. I have to sense into myself. I have to feel, you know, like my heart beating a little faster, or, you know, my energy level or my arousal level. That's the difference between felt experience and conceptual self-awareness. Now, I wrote that first book, I think, probably about 12 years ago. And since then, I've had a lot of clinical experience and personal experience. And also, there's been a lot more research on the brain and the body. And I've come to a very different perspective. It's related, but it's different, that talks about 3 different ways in which we can have embodied self-awareness. And we'll just talk about those in a little bit. I think Riitta has some slides about that.
Yeah. We can put the slide on about, and also show the picture of your earlier book, Body Sense. Soon. Here they are. I think it's also so touching and how to say, stopping your thoughts, your idea that maybe I would not have written this book earlier in my life because I had been too busy, too intense to let in the immensity of restorative experiences, what you wrote here in your latest book.
Yeah, I think that's very true for me. It may not be true for everyone. And when we get to describing what I mean by restorative embodied self-awareness, you'll be able, hopefully, to get a better sense of what I mean by that.
Yeah, and here is the picture of what you were referring to now, 3 states.
Yeah, so thank you, Riitta. This is very helpful, this slide. So in this book, Restorative Embodiment and Resilience, I talk about 3 states or 3 ways of embodied self-awareness. So there's the dysregulated state, the modulated state, and the restorative state. And again, I came to this perspective through my own personal experience, through working with clients and reading a lot of the new research on embodied experience. So this dysregulated state, actually all 3 states have some element of feeling and some element of thinking. That's something new. Embodied self-awareness is both feeling and thinking. So if we're in this dysregulated state, this is a place where we really have very little control over what happens to us. It could be sometimes referred to as a trauma state. We have these fight, flight, freeze kind of reactions in us, like you know, hiding from things, running away from things, or we get, you know, upset easily about things, or we ruminate our thoughts. Ruminate means to think about something over and over again endlessly, like a worry that we can't stop. It just keeps going. But we also have felt experiences that are that way too, like a pain that won't go away, or an ache in our heart that just keeps constantly, you know, calling our attention, or any kind of pain or physical, or it might be Another body feeling might be intensive feelings of sexuality, for example. So, there are people who are sexual addicts, for example, and they don't know how to control it, or feeling the need to have an alcoholic drink, or feeling the need to have some kind of drug. Those are all desires, felt desires, but they fall in this realm of dysregulated, uncontrollable. And if we can't get that drink of alcohol, we might start to think about it uncontrollably, like, where can I get that next drink? When is that going to happen? I'm worried that it won't happen. That's a dysregulated state. So just what's important is that we can't control it. We're kind of stuck there. It's a stuck state. And one of the questions Riitta had put down for me, which may come up later, is how do we get out of these states? And in my experience over many years, I don't think we can get out of a dysregulated state by ourselves. I think that's the definition of dysregulation. We're stuck there. We don't know the way out. It's very much related to, for example, a childhood traumatic experience where we might have an angry parent, for example, and we don't know how to escape. We don't know what to say. We don't know where to go. There's no place to go. There's no one to turn to. There's no one to tell about. And we're stuck there, and we may be stuck there for many years. And that creates a lasting, lifelong state of trauma. So, but we as adults, we all have these stuck places where we find ourselves kind of trapped, and we just can't get away from them. And we usually need some help. So that help could be a loved one who sees that we're stuck and comes up and puts his or her arms around us and gives us a chance to just feel and cry and feel loved. And, we start to soften, we start to open up a little bit. But in more severe cases of addictions or things that might be classified as mental illness, we typically would need some kind of professional or some sort of a support group or something like that, or some sort of embodied practitioner that helps us to become aware that we're in a dysregulated state. One interesting thing about dysregulation is that we're often not aware that we're there. Like, it's just so much a part of the way we're living our lives that we can't even recognize that we're stuck there. So part of, at least the Rosen therapy that Riitta and I practice, is about helping people just be aware that there's a stuckness, that they're caught, that they're frozen, or whatever it is that is there. Okay, so that's just regulation. And then there's this middle state called what I call modulated embodied self-awareness. And I would say that that's the state that most of us are in most of the time, unless we're really in bad shape and we're dysregulated most of the time. But I'm assuming that for most of us, we're in this modulated state. And this is a state where we're able to work, we're able to be with friends, we're able to cook meals, we're able to accomplish goals. It's a productive state. It's we can think. A lot of what happens in this state is problem solving and thinking through things. And there's actually two kinds of thinking that have been discovered since I wrote that first book. One is called the task positive network thoughts. And these are when we're thinking about something like we have a problem to solve, or let's suppose we want to make a particular kind of food, and we go to find the recipe in a book or on the internet, and we get all the ingredients together and we follow the instruction. That's task positive. That is, we're doing something that has a direction, that has a focus, that we're working on a task, we're thinking it through, doesn't mean we don't make mistakes, but it just means that we're working toward a goal. And we do have feelings, we do have felt experiences in these states, like, maybe we're baking a cake or something and we take it out of the oven and it looks beautiful and it smells good. And, we smile and we feel happy. But it doesn't last very long compared to all the time we spent thinking about and doing the task of preparing that cake. Or take another example, we might be at work and in a meeting with other people. We're all in this task positive mode, and we're talking and we're brainstorming and we're thinking through problems. And somebody comes up with a good idea and we all feel happy for a moment. Or somebody comes up with a bad idea and we all feel, I don't think so. So, feelings are part of it. They come up, but they don't last very long. But it's a functional state. In this state, we can also, we do a lot of thinking about our feelings. So this is where we would, we might kind of know something's bothering us. We have a sense something isn't right, or maybe we just feel uneasy, and we start to think about it. What happened today? What happened yesterday? Oh, I must be feeling a little bit frustrated because I couldn't get this person to listen to me, and that's why I'm feeling this way. So there's a word for that. It's called emotional intelligence, where we can talk about and think about and name our feelings. And it's actually enormously helpful to be able to do that. But what I want to say is that naming our feelings isn't necessarily the truth of what we're really feeling, because we're not really feeling it. We're thinking about it. So, and we can't really kind of really feel something unless we're in this restorative state that I'm going to talk about in a minute. So modulated states are very important. It's where we live most of the time. It's where we're productive. There's also another kind of thinking, which is called the default mode network, or the default mode way of thinking. So we may be, okay, we're finished with work. We're finished cooking. We go out for a walk, get some fresh air. Maybe we're by ourselves, and we find ourselves looking at the trees, looking at the scenery, but there are thoughts running through our heads. And they're not about anything in particular. They're just things that come up, and they could be very creative things. Like we've been working on a problem all week long and we haven't solved it. And then all of a sudden, while we're out walking around, this default mode network kind of allows some new insights or creative insight to emerge when we're not trying so hard. But it's still thinking, and in fact, we're missing all the smells and the feel of being outside. Our mind is still occupied with thoughts. So those are the two main kinds of thinking that tend to go on in a modulated state. And they're both good. They're both really important. We couldn't do without either one of them. We need that downtime for our minds to kind of go over things, and or we might, default mode thoughts are often about social relationships. What did we say? What could we say to another person? What's going on in our relationship? But we're not like trying to solve the problem. It's just thoughts that are coming to us. But actually, we're missing the felt experience of just being outside where we're walking. So that's what happens in the restorative state. So in the restorative states, we are totally immersed in the feeling. So when we're out walking, suddenly something happens, and we're no longer thinking. Like we just feel the wind in our face, and we get chills in our body, and we take a deeper breath, and all of a sudden we notice that there are flowers down there on the ground that we hadn't seen before, and we notice smells, and we notice our heart getting bigger somehow, and we're no longer thinking. Now, the interesting thing about that is that in order for that to happen, we have to let go of control. Now, sometimes it just happens and we don't. Well, actually, the only way it can happen is it just happens. We can't make ourselves go there. We can't say, okay, now I'm going to stop thinking and I'm going to go into a restorative state. Because then we're trying. And restoration is about non-trying, non-doing. We have to kind of let go of all the things that keep us together and kind of just fall into that experience. The same thing about being with another person. We can be walking or talking or having dinner with another person, and we're talking a lot. We're sharing things, we're being honest with each other. Sometimes feelings are coming up, but that's still modulated social engagement. To be in a kind of restorative social engagement is where we're just being together on that walk, and we're both really just being touched by what's happening around us. Or when we get hugged, we just feel the hug, we feel the closeness, we feel the warmth. All the thoughts just drop away. Okay, that's the difference. There are thoughts in restorative states, but they're not task-oriented or default mode kinds of thoughts. They tend to be images, pictures, or sounds, or memories just that suddenly emerge. They're not in any way directed or have a logical coherence, and they're spontaneous. We can't plan them, because the minute we start to plan or think about what we're thinking or try to get somewhere, we're back in the modulated state. I find with my clients that I work with that getting out of a modulated state into a restorative state is also something that's very difficult to do by ourselves. In fact, it's a little scary to let go of all the things that we've learned to hold our life together, be productive, and be good people. And then just to let that go and just totally be without anything that we have to do. That's not easy. And sometimes we need a guide to go there. So, yeah, that's the basic idea. Restorative states are about being totally present in the moment without any kind of doing. And, you might recognize, like, for example, Buddhist ideas about doing versus being. This restorative state has a lot of roots in spiritual practices, from many different traditions. So, yeah, I think that's a basic introduction about that, Riitta.
Thank you, Alan. It was really fascinating to listen. You describe all these 3 stages. And it came to my mind when I had a difficult period in my life, maybe when I was about 30-year-old. So I remember how I was somehow, it was so important for me to meet somebody who was really present in his or her body. And also now when you described that, I somehow understood that I was so dysregulated that this beingness of another person helped me to become more modulated, and maybe also to the yawning to the restorative state.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it was. I didn't know anything about any therapeutic practices those days.
Yeah, actually, what you just said reminds me of one other thing to say about those 3 states, which is I actually did some, I collected practitioner notes of Rosen Method sessions all about embodied self-awareness. And I asked the practitioners to describe, like moment by moment, what they felt and what they observed in their clients. And I didn't tell them anything about these 3 states because, in fact, I didn't even know about these 3 states when I started this study. And what I found was I could classify all of their statements, almost all of their statements, into one of these 3 states. And then because they describe things across the time that they occurred in a therapy session, I found that it never happened that someone went from a dysregulated state to a restorative state. They always had to go to a modulated state first. In other words, if you're dysregulated, we have to somehow get grounded in things that we know about, things that we can name, things that we can describe. Now, I actually feel that this may be part of a certain kind of cultural tradition, which we have in America and Europe and most places, which is we go through these long periods of formal schooling where we learn to think and we solve our problems by thinking. It may not be the case in more traditional cultures where there isn't that kind of formal training. They may be able to access these spiritual or deeper or restorative states from anywhere at any time. I just don't know because I haven't studied it, but at least with the populations that we work with in North America and in Europe, people have to get grounded in a modulated state and be able to name what happened in that dysregulated state before they can feel safe enough to let go and drop into the restorative state.
Yeah, it sounds very somehow, thinking about the practical work. I work, for example, with Pesso Boyden system Psychomotor, that there is this modulated state very strongly supported, and then when it person gets deeper, then it can come as restorative state. So it sounds logical to me.
Yeah.
That the modulated state gives the safety and being seen and heard and connect to the other person.
Actually, I think a lot of therapies and embodied practices, the end goal is a modulated state. If we've been dysregulated for a long time or living in a trauma state for a long time, it's a huge achievement to be able to get our lives back, to be able to function in the world without getting lost in addiction or worry or pain or any of those things. And what's interesting about the restorative state is there are relatively few therapeutic disciplines that I've found that actually explicitly include a restorative state. You're more likely to find it in disciplines that maybe have come from some kind of a spiritual tradition. So let me take yoga, for example. Lots of people practice yoga. Most people who practice yoga are learning to do the postures, learning to feel different muscles in their bodies. They're learning to do it in a very modulated way. And a lot of the modern ways of teaching yoga have left out the more spiritual aspects of yoga. So, and those spiritual aspects are training the body to come to a state of rest and to come to a state of peace. Now, typically at the end of every yoga class, there's a time when people go into what's called the corpse pose, like the dead person's pose. And we lie there and what happens to us? You know, that's an interesting question. If you've taken a yoga class, what happens to you? I would say that most people are in their default mode thoughts when they're in that place at the end of the yoga class. I don't know. I think it's relatively rare for people to really drop into this place of total non-doing, this place of peace and rest and restoration. And at least I haven't worked with any yoga teachers. I haven't had that many, but I haven't worked with any that talk about that. You know, it's more about just, this is the way we end the class.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder, is the interest for these embodied practices like bodywork, Rosen Method, for example, has grown so enormously, at least here in Finland during the past 2 years. So I think maybe there is this yearning to get these restorative experiences, since I realize, at least with my clients, that when people get there, that's something that really changes them, that really they feel that something happened.
Yeah.
That makes a difference, so to say.
Yeah. When I was writing this book about restoration, I looked at some of the research on emotional intelligence, which I mentioned earlier, which is has been enormously useful, by the way, in coaching applications and in business applications. You know, instead of just becoming angry at your employee or your boss or your coworker, can you just talk about it? Can you name it? Can you say, I'm really angry, to yourself or to another person? And can we talk about it? Can we resolve the situation? But it turned out that emotional intelligence, for all the good things that it does, doesn't lead to any improvements in health or softening of the soul, so to speak. Whereas restorative states actually, again, this is borne out by research, are actually states of healing, because we're no longer doing, we're no longer trying, we're no longer in a state of sympathetic arousal. We're more in a parasympathetic state, which we'll talk about shortly. And in those states, all of the organ systems of the body can begin to function more efficiently. Our immune system can begin to build, repair cells that, you know, that heal the body. So we really need this restorative state for health. And there's just so much burnout, from people working too hard, and there's so much disease that's actually generated by the pressures of society and the pressures of the internet and social media, because we're always caught up in it, and we can't slow down and we can't stop. And those, believe it or not, research shows that those create disease states, serious disease states.
Yeah, my next question was also that can you somehow, since the main question that this restorative state is the key for healing and well-being, is there something more you would like to say? You've already said a lot about that, but
yeah, you have I think you have a slide about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system.
yeah, comparing the polyvagal theory, you mean that's prepared? Yeah, please. I have a helper here who can put the slide.
So most of you, I assume, are familiar with Stephen Porges's work on the polyvagal theory. And he, of course, talks about trauma states, or what I call dysregulated states, as being partly sympathetic arousal, activation, like fighting or running away or hiding. Those all take sympathetic arousal. Or this dorsal vagus aspect of the vagus nerve that promotes freezing. That is, when we don't know what to do, when we get mentally confused, or we get literally frozen. So it's actually a very common state, like if we're threatened, or if we're in an automobile and something happens and somebody comes in front of us, or something unexpected happens, many people's first reaction is to freeze. We don't do anything to avoid the accident. And then, of course, that contributes to the later trauma, because we blame ourselves for not doing it, but it's actually a survival response. But the other part of Stephen Porges' theory is what I would place in the modulated state, which is the ventral vagus, which is the ability to process, to feel a little bit, but also the sympathetic. The ventral vagus is a parasympathetic nerve, which is a kind of slowing down and resting. But it's also accompanied by the sympathetic activation. So Porges talks about social engagement as being a kind of a good state of the autonomic nervous system, because we're able to converse, we're able to relate to people, we're able to enjoy our connections. But it does involve a considerable amount of sympathetic arousal. That is, we're activated in some way during conversations, during work, during sexual engagement. There's this level of activation that's modulated by also, having this parasympathetic, like, oh, this feels good, and I like this, and it brings us some kind of joy or sense of connection. Now, I don't, at least my reading of the polyvagal theory is that it doesn't include this restorative state. That is, actually, Stephen Porges' wife was where I first heard about this idea of the dorsal vagal without fear is a state of rest and peace. And I just saw in the notes that it's also connected to the hormone oxytocin. So in a restorative state, there's very little or no sympathetic arousal. We're totally in the parasympathetic state. And what this picture doesn't show us is how the autonomic nervous system is connected to all the other systems of the body, the nervous system, the digestive system, the heart, the breathing, the hormones. Every other system of the body is regulated in some way by the autonomic nervous system and the immune system. So when we're in a primarily parasympathetic state, which is what I'm calling restorative, I'm calling it restorative because it restores us. It heals us in some way. There's no more doing. As long as there's some kind of sympathetic arousal, our body has to get activated. And the way the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system works, and this developed over millions of years in animal evolution, is that whenever we're activated, we don't, the energy and the metabolism of the body is directed toward getting the task done, directed toward our muscles, or it's directed toward the thought part of our brain of trying to figure something out. If we don't have that sympathetic activation, then the parasympathetic nervous system can slow our heart rate, slow our breathing rate. It can activate, sympathetic states tend to activate the part of the immune system that creates what's called inflammation, which is actually helpful in the short run. Like if you cut yourself, you're going to get redness around the cut, and that's inflammation. And it's an important part of the healing process. We need that because then it closes the wound, and then a scab forms over that. The same thing is happening in all our internal organs. When we're always on, when we're always doing, then every organ in our body, almost every cell in our body, is receiving some sort of inflammatory cells from the immune system. This builds disease over time. When we're in a parasympathetic state, the immune system has the opportunity to turn on what are called repair cells, not inflammatory cells, but repair cells. So that cut, a scab forms, the scab eventually falls off, the wound heals. Those are all due to immune repair cells. Okay, but let's think about our hearts, or our lungs, or our hormone systems, or just about any other organ system in the body, our digestion. If it's almost always in a state of activation, if we're almost always in a state of activation, like the repair functions, let's say, of the digestive system, don't get to work. Our digestion slows. We develop digestive disorders or diseases. We have discomfort, digestive discomfort. We need that restorative state to rebuild, reactivate the cells in the digestive system that actually process the food completely, that create all those little microorganisms that live in our gut that we're learning about. So yeah, so it's complicated, I know. There's a lot of anatomy that goes into what I'm talking about. But that's really why the restorative state is fundamentally healing, because the immune system, as a primary place, has the opportunity to start repairing the damage that we did when we were trying so hard.
Yeah, I think there is a lot, and it was interesting to hear that it really is a key for healing. Restorative state. I look at the clock. I think there are people who would like to ask you questions, but I still would like to take a little bit more time with you. I wonder, for example, people like me who really work slowly with my clients and spend time to be myself embodied when I'm together with a client. It helps me to, I think that I feel this restorative state maybe more often than many other people who have busy lives and have tasks to do. But what kind of practices do you think that are important that whoever could reach this state more often, or give the room for it, since we can't do it?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Riitta, and it's unfortunately not easy. The answer isn't easy because I really believe and have observed in my own embodiment practice that we really need other people to help us to slow down and to just feel. Because in order to go to a restorative state, it's almost like, okay, I'm in this modulated state and I've got it all together and I know I've got my life working for me the way I want it. And to go into a restorative state, we have to let go of all of that. It's almost like jumping off a cliff or something. Like, that's impossible to do by ourselves. It helps to have somebody hold our hand, or to touch us, or to be with us, or create a safe container for us to just really let go. Now, not all practices that involve helpers, not all forms of psychotherapy, for example, would lead us to restorative states. Many forms of psychotherapy are cognitive based. That is, we develop thought strategies for managing our dysregulated emotions. Even some forms of somatically based psychotherapy have a lot of doing in them, breathing practices, all of those kinds of things. There's a lot of work right now on meditation and the effects of meditation on health. And for the most part, it's very positive. But the problem with meditation, and there's also some research on this, is that we do a lot of it by ourselves. And so we might be feeling like we're in a meditative state, but we're actually lost in our default mode thoughts. It's like the example I gave earlier, going for a walk outside, where we think we're smelling the flowers and we think we're relaxing and we think we're letting go, but in fact, the thoughts keep going. And there's a phenomenon that some people have called meditative dissociation, where we think we're in a restorative state, but in fact we're in a dissociated, that is a freeze kind of state. I don't mean that all meditation is bad. I think there are probably some forms of it, especially with long-term meditators. That's what the data says. People who have had like 10 years of practice of meditation can finally get to a point where they can actually just let go of all the thoughts. They can recognize the thoughts and they can step beyond them and move into these deeper states. But it takes a lot of training, a lot of practice. as long as we're meditating by focusing on our breathing or focusing on a mantra or anything like that, any kind of focus like that is a sympathetic state. So meditators in training are more likely to be in modulated states than in restorative states. I think so. So again, I just keep coming back to it really helps to have another person who knows about these states that can say to us, did you just start thinking about something? You were feeling something a minute ago. You were just really deep in your felt experience, and then something changed. Your breathing got shorter. What happened? You know, those are the sorts of things I might ask a client. Did you think about something? And, you know, of course, then they might say, yes, I was thinking about X, Y, or Z. And, you know, then we can follow the train of those thoughts. And, you know, my work would be to gradually bring them back to what the feeling was or what other feeling keeps coming up. But it's like I'm a guide in this very unknown territory of restorative experience, which for most people is really uncharted, unknown, and even scary.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. It came to my mind that when I work with my clients, it's often the silence is very important, that when that state is close, no words are needed anymore, or there is a pause in speaking. I was yesterday evening leading a PPSP, Pesso Boyden structure, and there was also a period of silence, and I think that was the deep place to really let the client to sink into the experience.
Yeah. And it's important when those moments of silence come for we as practitioners to notice the physiology, which is related to the autonomic nervous system. So if their breathing gets deeper, and if their muscles start to soften, and you can really sense that sinking in, and you as a practitioner can feel yourself sinking in, then you know that they're in a restorative state.
I think the atmosphere in the whole room changes.
Yes, exactly. Everything changes. I agree.
It's a whole space.
If they go silent and their muscles are tight and their breathing is tight, they're probably dissociating. They're probably dysregulated. So
that's completely different, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think we as practitioners learn to sense the differences by using the autonomic nervous system or the outward manifestations that we can notice of the autonomic nervous system.
Thank you, Alan. I'm looking at our timetable that maybe we need to give space for other people to ask you questions.
Sure.
So Scott, can you step in?
Yes, thank you. The first question, Sally, would you like to ask your question?
Hello, everybody. Hello, Alan. That was fascinating. And my question is about a piece in your book, your wonderful book, about dysregulated loss in aging and pathways towards restoration. There's a piece in there, and I'm, among other things, I'm a Pesso Boyden practitioner, so you don't have to believe in neuroplasticity, do you? We know neuroplasticity is a thing, and there's all the neuroscience now showing us neuroplasticity, and that's one of the things we work with in the Pesso system, is the idea that your history doesn't have to be your destiny. You can change the neural pathways, and our brains are capable of creating new ones. And we know that from all the stroke research about rehabilitating people who've had strokes. And in that part of your book, you're touching a really little touched upon area, which I'm more interested in as I get older, which is aging, because obviously aging is a degenerative condition, even though it's natural, it's a form of decline, or and might lead to the sense of dysregulated loss you describe in that piece. And I'm curious what your research or your thinking what's your take on aging if you have a degenerative condition in addition to aging, you know, like people who have, I've mentioned stroke, people who have Parkinsonisms of different types. What's your take on the possibilities for healing and restoration in those contexts? And sorry, my question was so long. I hope it's comprehensible.
Well, let me just say this. I have never worked with people like that. But just from what I know about it and what I've observed is that in many cases, the best we can do for people with those kinds of conditions is to get to a modulated state where they can function at least reasonably well in the world. I think aging, at least my experience of aging, and I don't have one of those degenerative conditions, is that aging has given me a chance to realize that not everything is as important as I thought it was. Like all the things I used to be so caught up in, they don't seem to matter so much anymore. And it's much easier for me to let go of the need to be doing something. So it's much easier for me to find a sense of peace and just sit still and do nothing. And of course, I don't have to work now because I've retired. And I have a lot more free time, so I'm able to indulge in those more restorative places. But I don't think that's true for all older people. I think, as you said, when there are real disabilities, it takes so much effort and so much time and so much work with, physical therapists and et cetera, that's all they can do. So that I think that I guess my basic answer is they're just different ways of aging.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a question about in Finnish, trying to find out terminology between modulated state or dysregulated state. I'm wondering if any or Mauri would like to address the issue of some of the terms and how they would translate into Finnish.
Well, we have discussed about this a lot, but we haven't found good word for this modulated stage. So it's there is not, you can't translate it straight. So you have to take it some other way. Alan, when we first met, you talk about this modulated state as a transfer. You are going from one place to another one.
Mhm.
Is this modulated something like that? So you are transferring from one place or one state to another.
Well, I think, nice to see you, Mallory, by the way. Been a long time since we met.
Yes, same.
Yeah, I was talking about what I called at that time transitional states.
Yes, that's the word, yes.
Transitional states. And yes, that's what has become of the transitional state is this modulated state, which I've gotten a little more clear about. But another word for modulation is regulation. And there must be a word in Finnish for.
That we have, yes.
So I would maybe think about using a word like that.
Okay.
Because yeah, there's a lot of literature about self-regulation. And I chose deliberately not to use the word regulation when I was writing about this, just because I didn't want to get it confused with a lot of what's been written about that term, self-regulation.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm right or wrong about this, but I just chose to create this word modulated. But it's in many ways, it's the same as regulated.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
And Päivi, you would like to ask something about observations on the differences of rhythms in the body in the different states. Would you like to ask the question?
Yes, thank you. Really, it came to my mind when you were describing the sort of the changes in the room when the stages shift, and also obviously when the autonomous nervous system situation, the state changes, obviously then the rhythms in the body also do change. So I would love to hear a little bit about, just over the years, what are your observations on how they are different, these rhythms in the body actions when the person is in a dysregulated state or in the modulated state or in the restorative state. So the rhythmicity in the body.
Can you give me an example? Can you give me an example of what you mean?
For example, there's a rhythm in the breathing.
Okay.
So it's calmer when you are in a restorative state, but then it can be erratic or tight and very kind of sharp rhythm when it's dysregulated, for example. But
Yeah.
I was wondering whether you have some observations on also in some other motor actions, if you could observe some rhythmic patterns that seem to go along with these different states. I was curious about that.
Yeah. So in a restorative state, breathing is completely relaxed. The diaphragm, which is the main breathing muscle, is just working on its own, and it's moving the breath in and out, and there's no effort at all. And you can see the body kind of opening up in that kind of breathing. And to the person in that experience, it feels like they have more space inside of themselves. The other thing that is interesting about restorative breathing is there's a longer pause at the end of the exhalation, breathing out. Typically, when we breathe out, before we breathe back in, there's a little bit of a pause. And that lengthens, that gets longer. in relaxed or restorative breathing. So it's almost as if the body comes to a complete rest in between each breath. And so there's just more, and you can observe more movement in the muscles. The muscles are less tense to allow, because there's all these muscles up here in the chest that also can control breathing, and those become less involved. That's more breathing from the diaphragm. So in modulated states, breathing tends to be a little bit shorter and more effortful. There may be, I mean, if we're really trying to do something, you know, we're pushing ourselves, and so all the muscles up here in the upper chest and the shoulders start to become tight, which constricts the breathing rhythm. So you find that the breath is a little bit shorter. I mean, people are still getting plenty of air, but it's not a relaxed breath. It's not this natural rhythm with the long pause at the end of the exhale. And in dysregulated states, there are probably different kinds of breathing rhythms. So one example would be a panic attack. Like, I don't know how many of you have experienced a panic attack. I certainly have. Breathing is really short. Like, we feel like we can't get enough breath. It's like, and it's terrifying. It's just, you feel like we're going to die almost. And breathing is really short and fast. There are other kinds of breathing rhythms in dysregulated states, which is where breathing seems to stop. And those also can be associated with moments of fear, where a kind of freezing, where, you know, our body, because of the fear response and the autonomic nervous system, thinks we have to be as still as possible. It's like an animal who's being chased or attacked. You know, when they go into one of these freeze states, they become totally still, and their breath is hardly moving at all. That's very different from panic breathing, but they're both dysregulated forms of breathing. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you. And it's just really fascinating too, when people are, for example, in these states, when they are doing locomotion, for example, they would be walking through space. How, I mean, obviously we are saying here that restorative state is a state of really not doing anything. It's a state of rest. So you kind of logically would think that then that's also that you are being stationary, you are not walking. but I wonder, could it so happen that you could also be?
Yeah, I mean, if you're exercising, of course, your body needs more oxygen, so your breathing rate is going to increase, and there's going to be more effortful breathing, just to oxygenate the blood, and your heart rate is pumping faster. So that's another change in rhythm, and of course, your heart rate goes faster when you're exercising or moving, because it wants to push more blood cells through the passages in the lungs to get oxygen, because your body needs that oxygen to feed the muscles. So yeah, you're gonna that's also an interesting kind of body rhythm change. But it's certainly not relaxed breathing.
Yeah.
But it's adaptive. It's adaptive for the purpose of what we're doing. But, you know, as I said earlier, you can have too much of a good thing.
Yeah.
You're always active and you're always stressed and your breathing is always pushing. Then it's going to lead to health problems.
Yeah, and I think that this restorative state is a very important notion, because in our Western psychology, we really have ignored and kind of walked by this theme of human beings needing to rest.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So I think this is a very important theme to become more attentive to. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you, by the way. Yeah, great question.
And Eva, you have a few comments about modulative and restorative and the healing connection with oneself and the environment. From Eva's point of view, nature and PBSP and assisted therapies include a good possibility to find deep embodied restorative states with the healing connection to oneself and the environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you if you find a practice or a therapy or whatever you find that brings you to that state of peace and rest, then, you know, and that's work, as long as it works for you, that's what's important. Just choose what really works for you. And, you know, I think it takes a little while to discern inside of ourselves and our felt experience when we're really resting in the restorative sense, or when we're just offline and we're in our default mode thoughts. Because default mode thinking is like, we don't even realize we're doing it. It's so pervasive. It's like, it's called default mode because it's just where we go when we're not doing anything else. But there is another place to go when we're not doing anything else, and that's this restorative place. And somehow we have to find a way that helps us to get there.
Thank you. And Annie has a question. Annie, would you like to ask it yourself?
She said her mic isn't working and wants you to read the question.
All right. How can one restrain one's nervous system to stay more in the modulated and restorative states? What kind of practitioners are specialized in this? And are there some helpful daily routines one can do by themselves, or exercise one can do with a friend or a partner that support this retraining?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't have a particular answer. For some people, like, I can tell you that the Rosen method that I practice, is designed to help people reach a restorative state. That doesn't mean that everybody who seeks Rosen therapy is going to get to a restorative state. It just may not be part of what they want or what they need. They may be just perfectly satisfied to get out of dysregulation. And I've had many clients, you know, once they find a way to get more modulated, they're done. You know, bye. You know, I'm done with the therapy. So, so that's one thing. Not everybody knows about it or wants that kind of to find that kind of place. And then the other thing is only each of you can truly know in your felt experience whether the person you're with or the practice that you're working with get you to those restorative states. Because if you come out of the session, whatever it is that you choose to do, and that could be being with a friend or a loving partner or a child or a pet. If you come out feeling more at ease, if you come out feeling better and softer inside, more in touch with your felt experience, more in touch with your emotion, if you're able to cry, those are all indications that you can use to judge whether this particular practice or this particular activity is getting you to that place. So really, only you can, and it's different for everybody. You know, it really is.
Thank you. And we have another question from Sanna Vokelainen. Would you like to ask it yourself, or shall I read it?
I can ask myself. I'm sorry, I'm a bit dysregulated at the moment as I have complex PTSD, but let me read it from the text I just wrote. The artist side of me strongly disagrees with the idea that creativity and insights would be thinking. Creative processes need the kind of unthinking feeling state that Csikszentmihalyi calls flow. Thinking comes after, when you realize that you just had a moment of feeling or insight. That moment then converts to an aha moment, which would be thinking, but after. So would you say that the artist here goes to a restorative state in the middle, but comes back to modulated state and thinking? And do you see that art and culture could bring some insights into this, helping people understand and get into the restorative state? I suppose Albert Pesso and Diane Boyden were originally also dancers, right? In dance and especially improvisation, thinking is more like noticing the bodily reactions through moving and feeling.
That's a really wonderful question. I want to say, and I think that there are certain moments when artistic inspiration does come from a restorative state, where we're not thinking, it just emerges. We just see it or feel it or hear it, or our body moves in a certain way. But again, the key is always what happens to us physiologically. So if the inspiration, the artistic inspiration, comes in a moment of deep rest and effortless breathing and all the things we've been talking about, that's primarily parasympathetic. And you know, you just see this picture in your mind about what it could be, what you're working on. And it just emerges and it fills you with a sense of joy or gratitude. Then it's coming from a restorative place. But if you're working on it, you know, like you're actually in some way thinking about it or in some way moving into it, like you're, you know, actually painting something or dancing or, then you're probably more likely to be in a modulated state, because that all of those things involve some kind of sympathetic activation. And artistic creativity can come from either place. What's important to discern is what's happening inside of you if it's really coming from a state of, rest and peace, or if it's coming from a state of activation.
Thank you, Alan, and all the Scott, and all the very good questions and very good answers. I think our time is coming to an end, but we really could have a series of these webinars, I would say. It's so lovely to listen to you, Alan.
Yeah, thank you. It was my pleasure.
Yeah. I would like to just seeing one quote you have in your book. It's actually Joseph Campbell's words. People say that what we are all seeking is a meaning for life. I don't think that's what we are really seeking. I think that what we are really seeking is an experience of being alive, so that our life experience on the purely physical plane will have resonances within our innermost being and reality, so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive. I love these words.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Yeah, there probably were some questions you hadn't time to answer, but yeah. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.